For the first time, the Muslims looked at their army and felt secure. 12,000 men, armor shining in the morning light, a valley ahead that seemed quiet, harmless. And somewhere among the ranks, a thought passed through the heart, not spoken as arrogance, not shouted as pride, but whispered as certainty. Today, we cannot be defeated. That whisper was enough. Enough for Allah to pause victory. Enough to let confidence turn into confusion. Enough to let the earth feel narrow and faith feel distant. Because Hunayn was not a battle of swords. It was a battle of reliance. And in that valley, Allah taught a lesson the Ummah would never forget. This is the story of Hunayn. Before we continue, subscribe for more stories like this and tell us where you're watching from. The air over Makkah had not yet settled. The dust of footsteps still lingered in the streets, stirred by thousands who had entered the city not as conquerors hungry for revenge, but as believers humbled by a victory they had never imagined possible. The city that had once driven them out now stood silent before them. Doors were closed, weapons were lowered, and hearts, some trembling, some curious, watched as the banner of Islam passed through its valleys and homes. It was a victory without bloodshed, a triumph without celebration. For many, it felt unreal. Just weeks earlier, this moment would have seemed impossible. Makkah had been the center of opposition, the fortress of resistance, the place where faith had been mocked, believers tortured, and the message pushed to the margins. And now, by the will of Allah alone, it had opened its gates, not through overwhelming force, but through divine decree. The believers stood together, shoulder to shoulder, stronger than they had ever been before. 12,000, a number that echoed in the mind. Never before had the Muslims gathered in such strength. Veterans of Badr stood beside new believers from Quraysh. Old wounds shared space with new hopes. Faces once hardened by years of persecution now softened with relief. The Ummah had grown, the banner had spread, the impossible had happened. And quietly, almost imperceptibly, something shifted. Not in action, not in words spoken aloud, but in the heart. For years, victory had come against all odds, always smaller in number, always weaker in means, always relying on something beyond themselves. Dua before dawn, trust in the unseen, certainty that help came only from Allah. But now, for the first time, the numbers felt reassuring. 12,000 felt safe. 12,000 felt sufficient. 12,000 felt unbeatable. No one stood up to declare arrogance. No banner of pride was raised. There was no open rebellion of the heart. It was subtler than that. A quiet confidence, a passing thought, a sentence spoken without malice. Today, we will not be defeated. It sounded harmless, logical even. But faith is not measured by logic, and reliance is not tested when everything looks secure. It is tested when security itself becomes the temptation. This was the danger of success, because victory can disguise its greatest trial. When hardship strips a person of illusions, success wraps them back in comfort. It convinces the heart that what was once divine assistance might now be personal strength. That preparation, numbers, and momentum can replace dependence, and Allah, in His mercy, does not leave such misunderstandings uncorrected. The believers prepared to move. Armor adjusted, lines formed. The army marched with discipline and confidence, carrying with them the memory of recent triumph. Ahead lay a valley called Hunayn, quiet, narrow, and waiting. It looked like just another path, but it would soon become a mirror, a place where Allah would separate numbers from reliance, strength from humility, and victory from arrogance. A place where the Ummah would learn that success is not proof of favor, unless the heart remains attached to the one who grants it. They did not know it yet, but the test was already written into the ground beneath their feet. The valley of Hunayn did not announce itself. It lay stretched between the mountains like a narrow wound in the earth, its slopes rising sharply on either side, its floor twisting just enough to hide what waited beyond the bend. At first glance, it seemed unremarkable, dry ground, scattered rocks, and the silence of early morning. But to those who understood warfare in the deserts of Arabia, such valleys were never neutral places. They were traps shaped by nature itself. In open plains, armies could see each other, lines could form, signals could be given. But in a valley like Hunayn, vision was stolen. Sound bounced unpredictably. Movement became constrained. The high ground belonged to whoever arrived first, and whoever remained unseen. For centuries, such terrain had been used to ambush the unwary, and the enemy knew this well. Hidden along the ridges and narrow passes were men who had chosen patience over pride. Warriors of Hawazin and their allies had arrived before the Muslims, not with banners raised, but with bodies pressed into shadows. They carried their weapons quietly, concealed behind rocks and brush, spreading themselves along the heights where arrows could fall like rain. They did not rush. They did not shout. They waited. Their leader understood that victory would not come from meeting 12,000 men face to face. It would come from surprise, from confusion, from striking first, not hardest. Orders were given with precision. Remain unseen, hold your position, and do not move until the valley is full. Every second mattered. Below, the Muslim army approached with calm determination. The march was orderly. The mood was confident. Armor clinked softly as rows advanced deeper into the narrowing path. There was no sign of resistance. No scouts reported movement. No arrows broke the stillness. It felt safe. And safety has a way of dulling caution. The valley welcomed them in silence, its curves swallowing the army bit by bit. With every step forward, retreat became harder. The high ground slipped out of reach. The exits narrowed behind them. Yet nothing seemed wrong. No challenge came. No warning sounded. Overconfidence rarely arrives as arrogance. It arrives as ease. The believers had prepared. They had strength. They had numbers. And in the quiet of that early hour, it was easy to assume that preparation was enough. The memory of recent victory still warmed their hearts. The thought that danger could lie hidden felt distant, almost unnecessary. Why would an enemy wait in silence? Why would they dare? But the enemy was not relying on courage. They were relying on timing. Above them, fingers tightened around bowstrings. Eyes tracked movement below. The moment was being measured not by fear, but by discipline. When the valley would be full, when confusion would spread fastest, when escape would be hardest. The plan required only one thing, that the Muslims keep moving forward. And they did. Step by step, the army entered a place already prepared for chaos, a place where sound would soon drown reason and shadows would turn deadly, a place where confidence would be tested not by force, but by sudden loss of control. The valley did not move. It did not warn. It simply waited. And in that waiting, the stage was set. For a moment that would change everything. Dawn broke without warning, not with light, but with sound. A sudden whistle cut through the air, sharp and violent, followed by another and another. Before the mind could register what was happening, the valley erupted. Arrows poured down from the heights like rain from a storm that had been waiting all night. They came from every direction, striking shields, armor, and ground with terrifying speed. There was no single enemy to face, no clear line to advance toward, only shadows above and steel falling from the sky. The calm of moments earlier shattered instantly. Men turned in confusion, searching for orders that could not be heard over the chaos. Horses reared, camels lurched, shields were raised too late, swords drawn without targets. The valley that had seemed quiet now swallowed every command and returned only noise. Panic spreads faster than fear. Fear is personal. It grips the heart one by one. Panic is contagious. It moves through crowds, carried by shouts, by sudden movement, by the sight of someone else turning away. In Hunayn, panic rippled through the ranks like a crack through glass. Voices cried out, some shouted warnings, others called names, some screamed without words at all. The tight formation broke. Lines that had marched with confidence moments earlier now bent, then snapped. Feet moved, not with strategy, but instinct. Forward was blocked, the sides burned with falling arrows, and behind them the valley narrowed, offering no easy retreat. The earth felt different underfoot. Though it was wide, it felt constricted. Though the sky was open, it felt distant. Though they were many, they felt suddenly few. The very ground seemed to close in, pressing against chests already tight with confusion. And in that moment, numbers meant nothing. The Quran would later describe it with painful precision. When your great numbers impressed you, but they did not benefit you at all. When the earth, vast as it is, felt narrow. When direction vanished and certainty dissolved. Some turned back. Some hesitated, some froze, caught between duty and survival. This was not cowardice, it was shock. The sudden collapse of expectation. The mind struggles when reality moves faster than preparation, and here, preparation had been built on an assumption that was now unraveling. That assumption was safety. From the ridges above, the ambush continued with merciless rhythm. Arrows struck from angles no shield could fully protect against. Each step became uncertain. Each breath came sharper than the last. The valley amplified every cry, every impact, turning confusion into a roaring presence. Footsteps began to retreat. At first, only a few. Then more. A backward movement becomes visible, and visibility gives it permission. What begins as repositioning quickly becomes withdrawal. Withdrawal becomes separation. Separation becomes flight. And still, the arrows fell. In the heart of that chaos, something far more dangerous than weapons had taken hold. The realization that confidence had been misplaced. That strength without reliance was brittle. That numbers without clarity dissolve under pressure. Hunayn was no longer a march toward victory. It was a test unfolding in real time, and the valley, silent only minutes before, now bore witness to a truth the Ummah would never forget, that when trust shifts away from Allah, even quietly, certainty can collapse in an instant. The lesson had begun. In the heart of the storm, when the valley roared with panic and the ground trembled beneath retreating feet, one presence did not move with the current. The Prophet ﷺ remained. Arrows still cut through the air. Dust still rose in choking clouds. Confusion still pressed in from every side. Yet amid the noise, there was a calm that did not belong to the valley. A steadiness untouched by the chaos around it. While voices fractured into shouts and cries, his voice rose clear, firm, unshaken, carrying certainty rather than command. He did not turn away. He did not retreat. He did not search for safety. He stood where he was meant to stand. This was not the stillness of defiance, nor the boldness of pride. It was the composure of one anchored to revelation. He knew what others could not yet see, that moments like this are not decided by movement, but by resolve. That panic feeds on uncertainty, and certainty must be spoken aloud. His words cut through the noise, not as an order barked in fear, but as a reminder spoken in truth. He called out, identifying himself not to be seen, but to be followed, reaffirming a reality that chaos was trying to erase. Nearby, Al-Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib understood what needed to be done. He had a voice known for its strength, a call that could travel across distance and confusion. At the Prophet's direction, he lifted his voice and called out, not to the entire army, but to the hearts that had already proven themselves before, names that carried memory, allegiance, commitment forged long before this valley. The call echoed off the mountains, bouncing back into the valley like a reminder returning home. It was not a cry of anger. It was a summons of loyalty. Those who heard it felt something shift. The sound cut through fear and landed somewhere deeper. It reminded them not of the valley, but of the pledge they had made, not of the arrows, but of the purpose that brought them here, not of numbers, but of obedience. Some turned their heads, some slowed their steps, some stopped altogether. Faith does not always return all at once. Sometimes it comes back in fragments, one step, one glance, one decision at a time. But once it begins to return, panic loses its grip. They began to turn back, not because the danger had vanished, but because clarity had returned. Not because fear was gone, but because something stronger had awakened beneath it. They gathered, not around a symbol, but around leadership grounded in divine command. This was not hero worship. This was alignment. Prophetic leadership does not draw strength from admiration. It restores direction through truth. In that moment, the Prophet ﷺ did not stand as a lone figure of bravery, but as the axis around which order could reform. His presence steadied the moment, allowing faith to reorganize itself. The valley still thundered, the arrows still fell, but the spiral had been broken. What had scattered through fear began to return through remembrance. Loyalty rekindled faith. Faith restored discipline, and discipline reopened the path forward. Hunayn was no longer only a place of retreat. It had become the place where certainty re-entered the hearts of those who had almost lost it, and where leadership, guided by revelation, turned the tide before the tide could claim everything. The turning did not happen all at once. It began quietly, almost unnoticed, one man slowing his retreat, another pausing mid-step, another turning his head toward a familiar voice carried on the wind. Fear had scattered them, but remembrance began to gather them again, not through force, not through command, through recognition. They returned one by one. A warrior who had fought at Badr steadied his breath and turned back. Another followed, then another. Small groups formed where moments earlier there had been only flight. Confusion gave way to awareness. Awareness reopened the space for choice, and in that space, faith found its footing again. They moved toward the source of certainty. The closer they drew, the clearer everything became. The noise did not disappear, but it lost its power. The valley still echoed, arrows still fell, yet something within the believers had shifted. Panic no longer dictated their movement. Purpose began to guide it. Lines reformed, not perfectly, not instantly, but deliberately. Shields were raised with intention, not reflex. Swords were gripped with resolve, not desperation. Voices that had shouted in fear now called out in unity. Each return strengthened the next. Each step back toward the center weakened the chaos that had tried to pull them apart. Trust in Allah returned, not as an abstract idea, but as a living force. This trust did not erase danger, it did not remove hardship, but it changed how both were faced. Fear looks for escape, faith looks for alignment, and alignment restores discipline. What followed was not loud, it was firm. There are moments in battle that cannot be explained by numbers or strategy alone, moments when balance returns too quickly, when hearts settle in the midst of noise, when resolve reappears as if poured into the chest. Hunayn held such a moment. Unseen assistance does not always arrive as spectacle. Sometimes it arrives as steadiness, as calm where panic once lived, as courage that feels borrowed rather than produced. The believers felt it. The same valley that had magnified fear now seemed to contain it. Movements became synchronized. Commands were heard and followed. Gaps closed. Direction returned. And with it, a realization settled into every heart present. Victory is not seized, it is granted. This understanding changed everything. Weapons are only extensions of the arm. Numbers are only arrangements of bodies. But faith shapes intention, and intention governs action. When faith reassembled, every movement carried weight. Every step forward meant something again. The enemy felt the shift before they could explain it. What had moments earlier looked like collapse now hardened into resistance. The scattered no longer fled. The disoriented no longer froze. The same men who had retreated now advanced, not recklessly, but with renewed clarity. Fear had lost its authority, and in its place stood firmness. Not the firmness of pride, but of submission. Not the firmness of self-confidence, but of reliance. The kind of firmness that allows a person to stand even when circumstances still rage. This was the true turning point of Hunayn, not when the enemy weakened, not when numbers increased, but when faith returned to its rightful place, above all else. From that moment forward, the outcome was no longer dictated by arrows or terrain. It was shaped by hearts that had realigned themselves with the one who grants victory when reliance is restored. The moment did not come with thunder. There was no sudden silence, no dramatic pause in the clash of steel. The valley was still alive with movement, with shouting and the sharp impact of battle. Yet within that noise, a decision was being made, one not written by strategy or numbers, but by decree. The turning point had arrived. From the center of the reformed ranks, the Prophet ﷺ stepped forward. Not with haste, not with anger, but with certainty. He reached down and gathered a handful of dust from the earth beneath his feet. The same earth that had moments earlier felt tight and hostile. The same ground that had borne witness to fear and retreat. And then he cast it. A simple gesture. A fragile motion. A handful of dust against an armed force. Yet symbolism in moments of truth carries weight far beyond its form. As the dust scattered into the air, carried by the wind across the faces of the enemy, it marked more than a physical act. It was a declaration that the outcome no longer belonged to human calculation. That strength had stepped aside, and reliance had taken its place. What followed was immediate. The enemy's advance faltered. Movements lost coordination. The confidence that had driven their ambush cracked under pressure they could not explain. Eyes stung not only from dust, but from the sudden loss of resolve. Shouts that had once carried certainty now wavered. Morale collapsed faster than formations ever could. This was not defeat by blade alone. It was defeat of the heart. When belief shifts, bodies follow. When certainty disappears, courage fractures. The same valley that had amplified fear among the believers now reflected confusion back toward those who had relied on surprise and timing. The believers pressed forward, not with arrogance but with clarity. Every step carried purpose, every strike followed restraint. Victory was no longer being chased. It was unfolding, and the difference was unmistakable. Because this victory was not seized, it was granted. The Quran would later affirm what the valley had already revealed, that help came not when numbers impressed, but when humility returned, not when confidence was high, but when reliance was pure. The battle was not won at the moment of entry, but at the moment of correction. Only after hearts turned back to Allah did the outcome change. This is the hidden order of things. Allah does not withhold victory out of punishment, but out of mercy. He allows missteps not to destroy, but to teach. Hunayn was never meant to end in defeat, but it was meant to expose a truth the believers needed to carry forward. That strength without humility collapses. That preparation without reliance is fragile. And that victory without faith is hollow. As the enemy retreated, their earlier advantage dissolved completely. What had begun with precision and patience ended in disorder. The valley released its grip, no longer echoing panic, but resolve. Dust settled, shadows withdrew, and the ground that had tested the believers now bore witness to their restoration. Hunayn was won not by the first step into the valley, but by the moment hearts returned to their proper place. When humility replaced assumption, when trust replaced confidence in numbers, and when Allah, in His wisdom, decided the outcome. From that point forward, the battle belonged to faith. Hunayn was not remembered for its formations. It was not preserved in memory because of clever tactics or superior planning. Historians could analyze the terrain, count the numbers, or measure the timing of the ambush, but none of that explains why this battle remained etched into the conscience of the believers. Hunayn endured because it carried a warning, one that refused to fade with time. It warned against a mistake that feels harmless. The belief that strength can replace reliance, that preparation can substitute trust, that numbers can secure what only faith sustains. Hunayn taught that victory does not arrive when resources increase, but when hearts align. That abundance can test faith just as severely as hardship, and that confidence, when untethered from humility, quietly reshapes intention. The believers carried this lesson forward, not as shame, but as correction. Hunayn reshaped how success was understood. It stripped away the illusion that growth alone was proof of divine favor. It reminded them that Allah grants victory not to those who feel secure, but to those who remain dependent. The battle did not weaken their resolve. It refined it. After Hunayn, triumph was no longer measured by numbers gathered or land secured. It was measured by the state of the heart at the moment of ease, by whether gratitude followed success and humility followed strength. This is why the lesson of Hunayn never aged. Every generation faces its own version of that valley. Different weapons, different resources, different numbers. But the temptation remains unchanged, to lean on what is visible and forget what is essential. Hunayn speaks to anyone who believes preparation guarantees outcomes, to anyone who confuses planning with permission, to anyone who mistakes capacity for control. It reminds us that resources are tools, not anchors, that numbers impress the eye, but faith steadies the soul, and that reliance is not proven when things go well, but when things go well and the heart still bows. True victory does not announce itself with noise. It settles quietly. It appears when arrogance is replaced with gratitude, when confidence returns to humility, when the heart understands that success is not earned, but entrusted. And like all trusts, it can be withdrawn when forgotten. Hunayn ended in victory, but its power lay in the moment before it. The moment when certainty was shaken, when panic exposed a fragile assumption, and when correction arrived, not through punishment, but through guidance. That is why Hunayn remains relevant, because it does not belong to the past. It belongs to every future that forgets. The battle teaches us to pause in moments of strength and ask, where does our reliance truly rest? On what we have gathered, or on the one who grants? And as the dust of the valley settled long ago, so too does the message remain, soft, steady, and unyielding. That true victory begins within, not when numbers rise, not when resources grow, but when the heart stays anchored to Allah, regardless of how strong the world appears around it. Hunayn was a valley, but its lesson is a compass.